I'm Joe, and I am a writer. I want to talk to you about some of the horror books that have influenced me. They're not necessarily my favorite books, but they are ones that made an impact. And the first one is by Patrick Suskind. It is Perfume, Story of a... Get out of the ring light. Perfume, Story of a Murderer. It's about a guy who can smell things very intensely, and he has a very strong sense of smell. And he makes perfume. It's about his quest to find the perfect, most incredible perfume. And he does this in a pretty gruesome way, and it's disturbing. It's not horrible. Like it's not like the worst thing I've ever read. It's not Jack Ketchum, but it is something that is uncomfortable at times. But it's also really beautiful, and the whole story feels like a fairy tale, but at the same time also really disturbing in the way that a fairy tale is disturbing. The next book is an obvious one, but it's one that I have to mention because it's one of my favorites, and it is The Shining by Stephen King. Obviously, a very successful and popular book, and one that I think gets talked about a lot, but it gets talked about a lot because it's very good. And it is interesting because it's about cycles of abuse and the way that generational trauma will manifest in relationships and families and childhood. And you know all this. I'm not only to get into what The Shining is about, but it influenced me because I relate to it strongly. I relate to both Jack and I relate to Danny, and as a kind of cautionary tale. Um, so I mean, just not to get into my own history, but I do have some relatable past trauma that makes sense to me when I read that book, and it's a good book. The next one is by actually Stephen King's son, Joe Hill. Over here. It's a collection of short stories. It's my favorite Joe Hill book. And I say that it influenced me because there are a lot of really great, really esoteric stories in here. There's one about the making of Dawn of the Dead, behind the scenes. Somebody who is an extra on the set of Dawn of the Dead. There's a story about Abraham Van Helsing's kids that's really interesting. There's just a lot of really good, awesome stories in there. Joe Hill is an incredible storyteller. He takes after his dad in a lot of ways, but he also does his own thing, and I really respect that. And I highly recommend that book. The next one is another popular one, but it's Haunted by Chuck Palahniuk. I like this one. It's my favorite Chuck Palahniuk book. I'm not huge on Chuck Palahniuk, but I do really like this book because it's fucking A. Okay. It's dark. It's a collection of short stories that are over interwoven into one broad story. It's famous for being super disturbing because there's a story called Guts in it, and then not all the stories are great. Some of the stories are just kind of shock value bullshit, but there's some really good stuff in there. There's a story about Marilyn Monroe that is really interesting, and I really recommend it. The last one is another kind of popular one, but it is Let the Right One In by John Lindquist. Lindquist. I don't know how to say that, but he wrote Let the Right One In, and it is very much like early Stephen King. There's some stuff in there that's maybe too uncomfortable for me. It hits a little too close to home, but that's okay. I can handle that, and it's worth it. It's a really great book. The movie that they made out of it, the Swedish movie, is really good, but I really actually prefer the American movie. I just found it to be a better telling of this story, and it's a better consolidation of the most important parts of that story. So I think that's worth investigating. But anyways, those are my picks.